Hello. Good morning. Good morning.
Will be interacting today. My name is Vida Echetabo. I am a certified wealth manager and I am a consultant, and I shall be your compare for today. To go right ahead into it, we first of all would like to appreciate everybody who has made it here early and everybody who has participated in the program up to this point. We believe that everybody is special and everybody should be duly acknowledged. However, we would like to specially make a mention and acknowledge certain people who are standing firmly behind this institution. And to do that, we would like to acknowledge the presence of Mr. Taiwo Adeniyi, President Neca. Please, could you rise and wave? We would like to recognize Mr. Kunle Oyelano, First Vice President NECA. We would like to recognize Mr. Victor Ebun Rajolo, Representative Tolerance. Yeah. We would like to recognize Dr. Ifeanyi Okoye, OFR MNI, Honorable Treasurer NECA. And we would, at this point, also like to recognize Mr. Adewale Smart Oyerinde, Director General NECA. All right, we believe that everybody else is duly recognized. It would be appropriate to just do a quick read through of and an introduction of the organization that is hosting us today. Essentially, NECA is the umbrella body to the organized private sector, and it's a platform that essentially synergizes the relationships between the government, public sector, private sector, and every other stakeholder in the country, and thereby plays a significant role in policy formation and making sure that we have a conducive working and productive environment in the country. Please a big hand to NECA. Okay, so we'd like to recognize, apologies, we'd like to recognize our speakers. We have Professor Bongo Adi. Please clap. I will read their full profiles later, but I will just introduce them. We have Dr. Muda Yusuf, Mr. Taiwo Oyedele, Dr. Joshua Bamfo, Dr. Ogho Okiti, and we have an amazing moderator today. She is all shades of brilliant. Her name is Mrs. Victoria Uwadoka. You guys are going to get used to me getting lots of papers today. Are we together? Okay. Okay, I would also, before I read out the profile for our keynote speaker, I would like to recognize members of the Governing Council of NECA. Apologies if I didn't recognize you before now. And of course, we have, you know how they say, we have virtual in-laws. You know, people who are online who have an opinion about what's going on in our lives. So at this point, we would also love to recognize and acknowledge everybody who is joining us virtually. We appreciate you, we celebrate you, and we acknowledge the commitment you're making to be part of this program today. Thank you. So, with much ado, not without much ado, I'm going to wear my glasses so it makes it more serious. And our guest speaker today, our keynote speaker, Professor Bongo Adi. Professor Bongo Adi was CIPRA MTN Research Fellow at Lagos Business School, where he facilitated classes in public-private partnerships, PPP, project finance, and development. He led various collaborations on research, case studies, and stakeholder engagement with various government agencies, including ICRC, NERC, and several ministries involved in public-private partnerships. He has over 17 years experience in teaching, policy research, and consulting. As an assistant professor, he has lectured at the University of Tsukuba, Japan, where he was a JSPS fellow, and at the American University of Nigeria. He has received several international awards, including the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science, JSPS. He is an UNU fellow and a World Bank scholar. Professor Adi has consulted for the World Bank, UNCTAD, JIRCAS, JICA, and UNU. He is widely published, and his current research interests include electricity markets design, private-public partnerships, and political economy of mega projects. This is a good clap for you to clap. He holds a master's and a PhD in development economics from the prestigious University of Tsukuba, Japan. He undertook postdoctoral training at the data mining team of the National Agricultural Research Center, Tsukuba, Japan, where he developed routines for forecasting rice yields from paddies using remote sensing data from the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, JAXA. He is currently a faculty at the Lagos Business School, Pan-Africa University. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, with a resounding applause, let's welcome Professor Ali.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, the chairman, DG, the members of the governing board, my co-panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege and honor to be with you this morning. This promises to be a very interesting dialogue on the Nigerian, well, not just Nigerian economy, but on the economy. The theme for today is promoting a novel approach to policy design, implementation, and monitoring in 2023. But as I was preparing for this, as I was researching and thinking about it, the World Bank, Oxford and the team released the data on poverty in Nigeria. Even though the DG had already sent me some kind of a guideline, so that I should route my presentation towards an economic outlook. But then, considering the panelists who are even better economists than myself, Dr. Okiti is here, George, Taiwo, these are colleagues that I've met several times, and I know that they are more than capable to give us a very robust outlook on 2023 economy. So I felt that I can go a little bit, philosophical. So rather, because when we talk about policy, policy is simply, from my own understanding, a guide that will help you to achieve some kind of objective in a particular area. But then policy itself is a component of a larger development paradigm. So when the report on poverty, multi-dimensional poverty was released, then it happens that 133 million Nigerians are multi-dimensionally poor. And then because I'm in academia, and every day I see that the students who graduate from the Lagos Business School, most of them have all migrated to everywhere, Canada, US, the UK. And that is the experience everywhere. Our medical doctors are living in groups. So my thinking was, rather than looking out, perhaps it would be an opportunity for us to look inwards. How come that after so many years of poverty targeting through poor policies, we have not managed? In fact, our people have become poorer than in the past, than any time in the past. So when we talk about an economy, we are employers of labor. So you'll be looking at the demand conditions. So you'll be interested in the purchasing power of consumers. So what is the situation when the consumers are so poor? Disposable income has completely evaporated. They are squeezed very hard. So what is the prospect for growing businesses and eventually for growing the economy? Because the growth of the economy is simply the aggregate of the growth of the various private sector agents that make up the economy. So rather than looking out, I said, let me just step a bit inwards. What is it? Are we really jinxed? Why, after all that has been done on poverty, starting from the military regime, the age of Mansa, mass mobilization for rural, all of that, better life for rural women, Then when Obasanjo assumed the leadership in 1999, he came up with the needs and actually set up a ministry or a department for poverty alleviation. Remember the KK, NAPEP, poverty eradication program. And then they were giving people all manner of, what is called empowerment, which for me is a very colonial terminology. Anyway, I will get back to that. So I felt that maybe I needed to look at what our development plan is. And then I looked at the recent the development plan that's been released by the government, which is a very well-written document. So covered everything almost. But then looking through it, my mind went back to what I used to know about the East Asian, the Asian miracle, the East Asian tigers of later years. And that took me back to the idea of the developmental state. Because it appears that we seem to be stuck in the past, using ideas, that do not correspond to the empirical, the existential reality that we face today. So I started to interrogate the idea of the developmental state to see if there is any way, how can we find a way out? Next slide, please. What I found, this is a kind of a development transition matrix. It will not be easy for you to understand, but let me explain it in a very simple way. So relative to the United States, how have countries, individual countries performed? What you observe is that it has not been easy for any country to actually make it out of its, let's say, the initial condition. Only 11 countries managed to jump from middle income trap to high income between 1960 and 2008. None of those countries in Africa, by the way. So in fact, we have had more countries fall back into poverty. And most countries still remain trapped where they have been. This is since the existence of data, macroeconomic data. Transition has become almost impossible. So I was thinking about that, and then my mind went to the work of a French economist, Thomas Piketty. I don't know, some people would have read his book, The Capital in the 21st Century. What I find very interesting in Piketty's work is his conclusion, which is that whenever the rate of growth, but the interest rates are more, whenever the interest rate or the rental rate, exceeds the growth rate, then the possibility of convergence disappears. So it will no longer be possible for incomes to converge. And then what we'll be having is more and more divergence in incomes and outcomes. And then inequality will become more and more endemic. And then, of course, that will have to go with poverty. But those countries that made it out of, the poverty trap, countries like Japan, the Asian tigers, the so-called newly industrialized East Asian economies in those days, how did they manage? So what did they do? That took me to the idea of the developmental state. There was this an African economist, Tandinka Nkandawire, who died during the COVID in 2020. He was one that first wrote, I read his work many years ago. And then his work was titled Rethinking the Developmental State in Africa. So that's why I lifted the topic for today, Rethinking the Developmental State. what should a developmental state do? Okay. Now, before we can get there, because it has to do with policy, we need to have a paradigm. And before we now, break it down into the tiny details of policy for implementation, for execution to achieve our various objectives. What does a developmental state do? So there is this in the literature. I looked at the literature and then I tried to look at the experience. I did research. I have not advised any country, and then I've never managed any country to go. So the best I could do is look at what has happened, what the literature has, what the research has produced. Okay? And then it happens that there is a very rich literature on this, very interesting ones. Okay? So from a theoretical perspective and from an empirical perspective, empirical in the sense that we try to streamline the experiences of states that are the countries that are doing well, okay, who are managing the situation, the context, the changing global context, and are able to achieve their intended outcome. So that is the approach I took. Now, in the beginning, next slide, we had the developmental states of Asia, East Asia. Like I said, countries that have managed to escape, I say, poverty. Okay? So for us, because the challenge that we have today in Nigeria, I don't think it's about exchange rate. Well, that is a big problem. Inflation is a big problem. Okay, but beyond inflation and the exchange rate depreciation and the whole brouhaha of macroeconomic central bank management, we have the issue of how to ensure and how to guarantee development within the system, how to guarantee growth in the country. Right now, it is not clear. We have the problem of poverty. We have the problem of brain drain. These two combine to undermine every plan, every policy. Because even the new developmental state paradigm that I will be looking at prioritizes human capability, human capital. You recall the man who won the Nobel Prize in economics in 2015, Angus Deaton. Deaton wrote a book. Some of us would have read it, The Great Escape. In that book, he found that the major distinction, the difference between developed, but rich and poor countries can directly be linked to the differential acquisition of human capital. Nothing dissipates, nothing decimates human capital like poverty. And then when the few that you have who've acquired that human capital live in droves, what is the prospect for growing the economy? I want us to begin to think about this in more, take it more seriously, because as it is, we are dwelling on the peripherals of macroeconomic, or the short-term measures. We can restore macroeconomic stability today. It will not solve our problem. When your best and the brightest have left, okay, and then you have to look for additional resources to produce replacements, and the resources are nowhere to be found. For me, that is the dialogue that needs to happen. That is the dialogue that needs to happen. And I can't think of a better audience or competent audience to tackle that other than the employers of level. In the beginning, the developmental state, that has been part of the century, was a buzzword. Governments that try to actively intervene in the economic process and direct the course of the development rather than relying on market forces. If you recall, that was the trademark of the Japanese, Asia, even China, as we speak. It worked for them in those days. It could, because of the context. And I will elucidate what those contexts were. When you begin to intervene in the economy and begin to push back the market forces, that could work depending on context. And it did work in that context. And that context is completely gone. So, the developmental stage, please give me the next slide. And again, this is a work in progress because I started this and I found it very interesting, and I thought that we can make a contribution here to look at what could be the new developmental paradigm that a country like Nigeria will pursue. I've looked at our vision. They recently released the economic development strategy paper. Wow, it's almost like reading the template from the Japanese miracle or the East Asian miracle. But given that we have completely transited that era, okay, we are in a completely new, different era. The competitive pressures, the competitive forces have changed. I didn't even bring this analysis to the fourth industrial revolution. Okay, I stopped short, okay, even before that. But then recall that where we are, we can't even talk about fourth industrial revolution, because even to talk about fourth industrial revolution, we sort of minimize the impact. If you follow Gordon Moore's law, that's the power of semiconductors tend to double every 18 months. And each of the doubling of the power of a semiconductor is equivalent to an industrial revolution. So that means every 18 months or even shorter these days, we are having something more than the industrial revolution that took the second industrial revolution took about 2 or 3 centuries. So the shelf life of knowledge of whatever seems to be halving every few months. So should we continue to operate with the mindset, with the paradigm of the past when every other thing is changing? Even when you look at software, if you are using Windows, for instance, the Windows version that you have will be like 2016 or Windows 11, which is I think that's the most recent one. Okay. So remember Windows XP, remember Windows Vista, and the old versions of Windows. All those have become obsolete because even softwares have to update. Policies are like softwares. We need to update them in line with changing circumstances. Then it's not just about updating the policies. We have to look at the human capacity. Again, that took me, while I was working on this, took me to Lance Pritchett, the Harvard professor, known for his work on state capability. That sometimes the inability of states, countries now, to execute or see through their policy thrust is simply because they lack the capacity to do so. And despite best intentions, they cannot achieve their goals. What he called that isomorphic mimicry. So we've got government, we've got institutions, we've got MDAs, we have a CBN, central bank, that is structured similarly to the central bank everywhere else in the world. But the issue here is that the personnel, the human agents, the actors within these systems have a different set of incentives. That at the end of the day, a plan that works for a ministry in a country, say the United States, will not work, in Nigeria because of what he calls isomorphic mimicry, state capability. Another point in the debate, how can we build state capability? It's a very serious problem. Our problem is not because of the absence of policies. We have tons upon tons of policy documents. The challenge is implementation. And that is why I started to look at, okay, is there anything that we can get from looking at this developmental state paradigm? What makes a state developmental? Now, in the case of the Japanese and the East Asians, so there are certain commonalities. Can you give me the next slide? Okay, so you have the developmental state, the classic one. That's the Japanese, the Asians, the Singaporeans, and all of that. Of the old era, like I said, this has become obsolete as well. Those countries have changed, even though they use this model, this paradigm to transform their economies. But because of changing circumstances and the changing realities of today, they are no longer stuck here. They have moved on to update the software of development. Okay, so so this way they had a strong centralized and authoritarian state, a wide-ranging interventionism and the central role of industrial policy, elective and discretionary measures, and the practice of picking winners and supporting them. The central economic, political, and social role of large, diversified business groups. A meritocratic bureaucracy with embedded autonomy. The primary role of the agricultural sector and land reform. Export-oriented economic development strategy with state guidance and market-conforming methods. Now, some of these plans are still relevant in the age that we are now, but this is essentially what drove the Asian miracle. Why did this work for them? Next slide. Why did this succeed? Okay. Okay, another thing is financial repression. Yeah, this is a very important one. Okay, financial repression means that the government intervened even in the financial system by carefully, discretionarily allocating funding to create the right incentive and to achieve their objective. So it was not a free market financial system. So they had implicit and explicit state guarantees, bailout policies, limited entrance into financial markets. I remember while I lived in Japan, whereas then in Nigeria, you could send money anywhere in the world, but in Japan, you cannot send money above a certain, I think you cannot send more than 10,000 yen through, what do you call it? The money transfer, companies. You cannot. Then you have to sign a whole lot of papers. That's financial repression. Macroeconomic stability and good macroeconomic management, share and equitable growth. Now, when it comes to macroeconomic stability in those days, if you're familiar with the Japanese system, you will recall that until 1985, the Plaza Accord, they had their exchange rates fixed at 360 yen to the dollar. So such a unilaterally highly devalued exchange rate, of course, was in their favor because they were producing for the rest of the world. So the devaluation of the exchange rates kind of gave them that enormous export advantage, trade surplus with every country they traded, until they were forced by the United States under the GATT. Before, in fact, it was because of the Japanese that we now moved from GATT to Uruguay to Doha and to the current global trade system, just to rein in their tendencies. Even the Chinese borrowed from them. So the Japanese produced a template that all the Asians used in those days. Next slide. Okay. So the industrial structure of Taiwan, for instance, so there are some differences in some countries, but essentially it was still the central role of the states, okay, in championing development. Next slide. Next. Okay, next. So the historical and the institutional context of the success, okay, would be the historical interplay, political, economic, ideological, social, regional, and security forces contributed to the East Asian economic miracle. First, we have the global political context of the post-war period. That's after the Second World War. National capitalist development concept, economic nationalism. We also had, the mercantilist approach growing protectionism, relatively closed economic systems and models as a result of the Cold War that was still ongoing between the United States and the former Soviet Union. In the context of late development, national base for this capitalism, the promotion of strategic national industries, and in the context of underdevelopment, mass poverty and infrastructural deficiencies caused by the destruction of war and economic catching up as the first priority supported by wide social consensus. So there was a social consensus given the experience of those countries during the war. Okay, remember Japan was a colonial and imperial nation all over Asia. And once they started to grow, so they found it an obligation to really support the other countries. So they were transferring aid to them. In fact, Japanese foreign policy, even to today, remains their immediate neighbors, the Chinese, the Thais, Malaysia, Singapore, South Korea, Philippines, all those places that the Japanese military dealt with for the Second World War and during the Second World War. So they supported those countries and provided the template on which those countries were able to bootstrap their development. Next. Okay, of course, Japan's outstanding role within the region is important to recognize. And then secondly, we have the complex role of the United States in security and economic policy, whereby it provided development and military aid based on geopolitical considerations. Even today, you still have the American bases all over Japan. Japan doesn't spend much on defense. Okay, so its defense budget should be one of the lowest in the world. They are not interested. It's the United States, that are located all over the Japanese archipelago. Then you have foreign direct investment that flowed massively. Then they had preferential market access. Now, these advantages that they had, that in Africa, in Nigeria, we do not. So, but when we talk about development and all of these things, why our policies fell, we tend to ignore all of this. So all of these produce substantial implicit and explicit benefits for the development of the Northeast Asian region. That was then. But the global context has changed.
Yes.
So this no longer work for those countries. It did work for them and helped them to deal with poverty, kind of eradicated poverty and misery in their society. But today, everything has changed. The Japanese economy has been, since the Asian financial crisis, the Japanese economy has not recovered from its recession. But because of accumulated savings, and then because they had a very deep financial system, you have the Japanese, the Bank of Japan, which played a role, still plays that role like the Bank of China. And then you also have the Japanese Postal Office, that was also a bank, okay? A deep financial capacity, more than top international banks. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, so given that the context, the old context has changed, and then it's no longer possible for developing countries today, or developmental states, to leverage all those policies and strategies that helped the Asian countries. How can we manage to bootstrap our development? I think that is a question that we need to ask. I think we should debate that vigorously. Nigeria is kind of different. Different in the sense that we are lucky, we are privileged. We've got natural resources, natural endowments that notwithstanding the changing international environment, the whole challenge of sustainability and all of that, we still have something that we can push to the rest of the world to generate income and to help our people solve our problems. But the question is, why are we not doing that?
Okay, all right. Yeah, I sent you a mail to reconfirm.
I know that when we talk about corruption,
I can reach out to the PG.
Everybody knows about that. But my belief is that corruption is a problem of incentive. Is it possible to disincentivize corruption?
Okay.
There is no policy that you can implement under corruption, under this corruption equilibrium that will ever work. So our problem is not that of policies. How do we, get the kind of human capital or capability? How do we grow the institutional capability to pursue and execute to the letter our policies? I don't have an answer to that. Now, what we notice is that the new developmental states, yes, there are some countries that are still charging despite the changing global environment. And then what tools are those countries using today? I'm talking about countries like Brazil. Well, that was until recently, but they still have the fundamentals very strong. So I'm sure that as soon as the storm is over, the Brazilian economy will still bounce back. We have, in Africa, we have Rwanda. We also have South Africa and a couple of other countries that are managing their affairs very well. So what are they doing? That's the question. So there is something that I'll summarize the remaining. As I said, this is work in progress. You will get a slide and you can go through it. The first one is that there is no big idea about a developmental paradigm. The volatility and the uncertainty in the global economy is such that no country can stick to the same plan. As things change, countries have to adapt. And that is what, again, Lance Pritchett and his colleagues refers to as problem-driven iterative adaptation, PDIA. So countries that are growing today are using this method, okay? Trial and error, sort of. But then the lag between the feedback is so short that they're able, to adapt, adjust, and, rejig the situation. Problem-driven iterative adaptation. Now, the second plank of the new developmental state paradigm is outward orientation. Of course, the Asian tigers had it. Outward orientation simply speaks to an export-led economy. Now, when you talk about an export-led economy, it's not just about exporting. It also encompasses diversification of economy, as well as the diversification of markets. Two things: economic diversification and diversification of markets. This is where Nigeria has failed. We've been talking about diversification. You can go to Atlas Observatory of Economic Activities, Atlas Observatory of Economic Complexity, online, okay? You will see our product space. The product space is what Nigeria exports each year from 1965, when data happens to be available, till 2020. So if you type, what did Nigeria export in 2020, for instance, you will see Nigeria's product space. And when you look at our product space and compare it to the our product space in, say, 2015 or 2020, and contrast it with the product space in 1965, you will see that we had a highly diversified export economy, targeting different markets abroad. But today, okay, because in that Atlas of Economic Observatory, different colors, so it's just like a kaleidoscope. So you have different colors representing different export items. But today, when you see it, it's so black because it's a single commodity. Okay, 95% of what Nigeria exports is crude oil. The other ones are completely insignificant. So we have no diversified exports. No country can manage to transit, okay, out of poverty without a diversified export portfolio and without a diversified market, not just one or two countries. Then the most important one and the last one, I don't know, I'm sure that I'm not exceeding my time. The most important one is actually political entrepreneurship, where you have the civil service, okay, the same thing, meritocratic-based civil service, highly trained, highly motivated, but work like the private sector and take responsibility for selling the country. Then you have the political elite who are able to forge a consensus, okay? A consensus, the larger consensus, such that the system will not be open to elite capture or the capture of vested interests, which is, what we have gotten wrong. People talk about rigged prosperity. That's what we have in Nigeria. You cannot have this system of rigged prosperity that we have today, and then you expect poverty to go away. No. No, the inequality in Nigeria, the measures of inequality. I don't use the World Bank data. Why? I'm also a data analytics, I'm a data scientist. In those days, in survey data, you have to use some kind of stratified sampling design to generate your data. So whenever I see any of these statistics, the first thing I interrogate the data generating process. The World Bank, yes, of course, that's the only thing we have. We have no capacity to generate data. So I don't trust what the World Bank does, and I'll give you my reason. Now, in Nigeria, the enumeration areas are the electoral wards, EAs. Now, each electoral ward in Nigeria, you will have at least 1,000 households, okay? If you have 500 households, families, it'll be more than that, okay? Now, the World Bank will sample just 5 households. Supposing we have 500, and then we sample 5. That's how many percent? That's grossly insignificant. It's not statistically representative of the population. And so when you're making friends based on such limited data, it will definitely be biased. If you think I'm lying or if you doubt what I'm saying, you can check the Living Standard Measurement Survey of the World Bank for Nigeria. You can put it into Starter, any software you can manage. Then you decompose it and look at the words, and then you see what I'm telling you. In a word, what you see is just 5 households. How do you just use the income of 5 households to generate the average income of the entire enumeration area? It's bias. And that's why their inequality measure, which put it at 0.3, is completely balderdash. I don't trust that. The one I trust is the one that Oxfam did, thinking about 2018. Okay, and then they looked at the what do you call it? Bank accounts in the Nigerian banking system. And then they found out that just about 2% of Nigerians, okay, 2% of Nigerians own 98% of the bank accounts in Nigeria. So meaning that 98% are unbanked, have no presence. They are anonymous. That's inequality that we're talking about. Now, there is something about inequality. I mean, there are some scholars who've spent their careers, their lives, Danny Roderick of MIT, studying inequality. What they found out is that when you have such high level of inequality, it is not possible to eliminate poverty. In fact, what you will see is, an entrenchment of poverty. And then another thing I've also learned from the research is that the pro-poor policies, the so-called pro-poor policies, None of it has worked anywhere in the world. You cannot eliminate poverty by targeting poverty. It has not happened anywhere. I can give you instances. Muhammad Yunus, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, the Grameen Bank, Bangladesh guy, right? So you would have asked what has happened to those micro this, micro that. Is Bangladesh a rich country today? No. It's still suffering. They have all manner of issues. Okay, a little bit better than Nigeria because they have some kind of trend workforce. Then you have all these factories locating their this thing there, global brands locating their factories to take advantage of cheap labor. That is all. But those things we heard about the power of microfinance, the power of micro this, micro that, none of that has worked. The lesson coming today is that the only way possible to eliminate poverty is to grow the economy. Grow the economy. Simple. If the economy doesn't grow, poverty does not grow. Now in China, all the Asian tigers put together, for almost 30 years, they had an average growth rate of 5.5%. If you follow the rule of 70, for instance, a variable that grows at the rate of X will double every 70 over X years. So income is growing at 5%, okay? 70 over 5 gives us, that's 14, right? Okay, so in 14 years, we have a doubling of our per capita income. So if it grows at 10%, that means in 7 years, only 7 years, less than a decade, your per capita income will double. And once income grows, like they say, rising tide boils all boats. That filtering down effect will, lift people out of poverty. So poverty targeting, and which is where I think the managers of the economy in the past few years, in fact, over time, have gotten it wrong, and it has not worked. So that's my conclusion, where I started. How do we eliminate poverty? We have to, get back to the developmental state. What are those tenets, the planks that make a developmental state possible in the context of today's world? And then how can we, begin to adapt those to change the policy-making machinery in Nigeria? I think that should be, for me, what we need to discuss. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, I believe he deserves more than that. Please put your hands together and let us acknowledge somebody who has done that level of work. Thank you very much, Professor Adi. That was a very robust conversation where he has touched on several topics, several hot topics. And so, he touched on human capital attrition and how that is in fact depleting the potential of the improvement of our economy. He talked about industrialization, he talked about corruption, he talked about so many moving parts. And to take the conversation further, we're going to invite our panelists, our discussants, to come forward and, take apart this conversation. There is a popular quote that says that your history, is really relevant and plays a role in your future and the success that we intend to attain. Interestingly, this morning, I was listening to a document, an audio document as I drove down this way, and it mentioned something that I would just, in a concise manner, say that our experience prepares and really equips us for what we have gone through. But it's on us, the onus is on us to do all we can to prepare for expansion. So we have to move from a place of experience, because like he's rightfully said several times in his presentation, that his document is work in progress. And he is very much aware that even as he's speaking, there are a few things that might already be obsolete in what he's done. And so we must now be prepared to make sure that we are, moving ahead of the curve and bringing the necessary results that will be relevant to the future and not bring results for where we are today. Thank you very much. So at this point, I'm going to invite our various panelists, and I will read out their profiles. Please remember to clap. Please remember to smile for the cameras. This is going on the media, so if your face is strong, it will show. All right, so we'll start with Dr. Muda Yusuf. He is the immediate past Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI. He served in that capacity for over a decade. He is an economist and has contributed immensely to the national economic discourse through his research-based analysis of policies of government as they affect various sectors of the economy. He is currently the founder CEO of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPPE, an NGO committed to the ideals of free enterprise and private sector development. Clap, please. Thank you. Dr. Yusuf obtained bachelor's and master's degrees in economics from the University of Ilorin, Nigeria, and University of Lagos, Nigeria, respectively. He has a master's degree in business research from the Swiss Business School, Switzerland. He also holds a doctorate degree in business administration, also from Swiss Business School, Switzerland. He has good insights. I love my audience. He has good insights and competencies in business and corporate strategy. He is an alumnus of the Lagos Business School, having attended the advanced management program of the school. He has participated in numerous high-level public policy advocacy dialogues at both the federal and state levels, with the aim of fostering a conducive environment for private sector development in the Nigerian economy. He is a leading advocate of an enabling environment for the Nigerian private sector and has a vast knowledge and exposure on business research, policy, and regulatory issues affecting business. Dr. Muda Yusuf has attended numerous prestigious courses, conferences, and seminars, both locally and internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, join me as we welcome Dr. Yusuf to the podium. Keep clapping, please. Next, we have Mr. Taiwo Oyedele. Mr. Taiwo Oyedele is the fiscal policy partner and Africa tax leader at PwC. He is a known author, keynote speaker, strategist, policy analyst, and commentator on finance, business, and economic matters. He is the lead for the Fiscal Policy and Planning Thematic Group and chairman of the West Africa Debt Management Roundtable of the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, chairman of the Taxation and Fiscal Policy Faculty Board of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, member of the Nigerian Taxation Standards Board, and a member of the Ministerial Committee of the Implementation of Nigeria's National Tax Policy. Mr. Oyedele is a regular guest on various media programs on television, radio, and online broadcasting platforms. He is frequently referenced in many national newspapers and international publications. He is a member of the Global Tax Forum of the ACCA and a former member of the Global Governing Council of same. Mr. Oyedele is an associate professor at the Babcock University Business School and a guest lecturer at the Lagos Business School. He is an alumnus of the London School of Economics, Yale University, and Harvard Kennedy School Executive Education. He is the founder and president of Impact Africa Foundation. Please join me in making Mr. Oyedele welcome. I'm sure I'm mirroring a lot of people, but we like Mr. Oyedele. Yes, don't we? All right. So next we have Dr. Ogho Okiti. Dr. Ogho Okiti is the current managing director of BusinessDay Media Limited, publishers of BusinessDay newspaper, West Africa's leading provider of business intelligence and market-moving news. Prior to his appointment into the current position, he functioned as the founder and CEO of Times Economics, a communications, economics, and strategy consulting firm based in Abuja. Over the past 5 years, he's facilitated monthly economics and business-focused breakfast meetings at the Transcorp Hilton Hotel, Abuja. Dr. Okiti had previously worked in BusinessDay from 2007 to 2012, during which he served as the chief economist and the chairman of the editorial board. From January 2012, he served in the presidency as a special assistant to the chief economic advisor to the president. Over 3 years, he developed his closest relationships with public policy making and a good section of other public policy makers, both in Nigeria and internationally. In this role, he developed the critical understanding of the dynamic and integrated nature of policymaking, implementation, evaluation in an environment that not only involves, but also brings together heterogeneous activities. In addition, he coordinated the Office's Secretariat of Nigeria's hosting the World Economic Forum in Africa in 2014. He received his, please clap for the presidency. He received his PhD in economics from the University of Manchester in 2003. His postdoctoral experiences revolved around research, public policy commentary, and providing public policy advice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Okiti. All right, so next we have Dr. Josh Bamfo. Dr. Josh Bamfo is a partner and head of the transfer pricing, TP, and economic advisory services practice at Andersen in Nigeria, as well as the global co-leader for TP with the responsibilities for Africa and Middle East. He is a trained economist and has over 16 years experience specializing in TP while working for Big Four firms in the US, South Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana. Prior to commencing his TP career, Josh was a visiting assistant professor at his alma mater, University of Delaware, USA. He has his PhD from University of Delaware, USA on economics. He has also his master's in economics from University of Gulf, Canada. He has his BA from University of Ghana, and he has a first class for that. He is an affiliate member of the American Economic Association, and he has specializations in economic advisory services to the Board of Trustees, government and private businesses, global and regional TP documentation, TP planning and transfers, intellectual property planning and transfers, as well as advanced pricing agreements. Dr. Bamfo is an ardent speaker at various TP and economic workshops and seminars, and an author on numerous transfer pricing articles. Please join me as we welcome Dr. Bamfo. The energy on the platform, we're going to invite, and I will read out her profile, but we will be inviting Victoria Uwadoka. Victoria Uwadoka is the Corporate Communications and Public Affairs Manager for Nestle Nigeria. Her role includes leading the company's engagement within the industry, media, the public sector, academia, and other stakeholders. She is also responsible for coordinating Nestle's Nigeria's sustainability initiatives. Victoria has over 20 years experience in corporate communications, media relationship management, stakeholder engagement, and marketing communications. She has worked across various industries, and I'll just pause here to say that just before she moved to Nestle, she was in Microsoft, and her competence and her capacity covered not just West Africa, but West and Central Africa. She's worked in various industries, including logistics, entertainment, beauty, healthcare, ICT, food, and beverages. So if you need somebody who has her fingers in all the pots, clearly, Victoria is the go-to person. Victoria also serves as the chairperson of Neca'S Technical Committee on Corporate Communications and Public Affairs Expert. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, with great joy, we'll welcome Victoria.
Our keynote speaker, Professor Bongo Adi, has spoken to so many issues that we'll be discussing today, and I'm sure that we'll have some questions for him as we go along. But really, economic policies are essential structures designed to promote national growth and development. And if we do not get policy development, implementation, and monitoring right, we will not get where we want to get within the Nigerian project. We won't get it right at all. And as our keynote speaker has already said, we have tons of policies, so that policies are not the problem, right? That's not the problem we have. We have tons of policies. So we cannot be said to be doing nothing, but we don't have the results that we expect. That means that whatever we're doing, we need to do it differently. And so the theme of this dialogue is important, promoting a novel approach. We need to do things differently, to design policies and to ensure the implementation, monitoring, and also reevaluation of the policies where we need to. And he also said that policies are like software. They need to be updated in line with current circumstances. If they're obsolete, they're not going to work. If they are based on the wrong premise, they're not going to work. So that's really super important. And now, as our nation gears up for another cycle of general elections, and we'll have a new administration come May, it is imperative that as industry, as the organized private sector, we put together our thoughts. We align our thoughts on what we want the next government to do, what do we want our country to be like, what do we want to achieve as a nation. And so today's dialogue is to come up with solutions. We've heard all the problems, so we're not here to discuss the problems again. We're going to look at the solutions. What do we need to do differently? How will we do them? Who has to play what role? And so that we can get the results that we want as a country. Now we're in a situation where government revenue is depleted by rising inflation, so many elements, and we won't talk about the mismanagement and all the problems that we have in the country, but we're going to look at what solutions, now that the government is really grappling with that depleted revenue situation, which has created new dynamics for our economy. We have a problem with the persistent rise in inflationary pressures on all sides. And we've talked about the poverty, the brain drain, and all of that. So here, I mean, you're all experts. I won't be intimidated by your profiles because I know you're going to give us solutions today. What do we need to do? And we'll start with your first thoughts on where we need to go as a nation. We know where we are. Where do we need to go? And how do we need to get there? We're talking about a novel way of designing policies, a novel way of renewing policies, bringing out new versions of the policies. Where do we need to go? And I'll start from you, Dr. Eo, and then we'll go down that way. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And first, before I comment, let me just congratulate Prof on that presentation. It was very, very insightful. And I think only those that stayed in the university after their PhD could present like that. I'm not sure I could do that. But I mean, when you want to talk about Nigeria, you first of all have to take a deep breath. Yeah, you just have to. And you first of all have to ask your the question, what is wrong? What is wrong? I mean, because as I said before I came into this hall, anyone in Nigeria can tell you what is wrong. So let's begin to dimension it. Our politics is wrong. You know, they were that's why I'm so happy with your presentation, not economics graph, not that. Our politics is the problem. Our politics, those that rule us, they don't have the incentives to promote our long-term development. Those incentives you mentioned that don't align. They don't align. I am paid on a daily basis to promote BusinessDay Media Limited. The moment the incentives does not align for me, the business does not grow as it's supposed to grow. And of course, either I'm enriching myself or some way it will show that the incentives and the time I spend don't align with the growth of the company. But there are two things I must say though, having said that. Over the years, and one of the ways it has shown is that over the years, we have built some consensus, especially maybe from research or from the business community, but we are not able to push through those consensus. And you talked about capacity. So why are we incapable of pushing through those consensus? So let me use two elements of that. One, our policy making and adjustments, they are very, very slow. I mean, very, very slow. Policies matter, by the way. They're very, very slow. Why are our policy making slow? I mean, if you ask, I mean, I'm what now? I'm over 50 years old. When I was doing degree in economics, master's in economics, PhD in economics, we've been on fuel subsidy issue. I mean, we've been on it for 48 years, we've been on it. And the consensus is this is not working. But why is it that we are incapable of moving from this situation to that? That is just one. So our policy making is very slow. Policy adjustment is very, very slow. What then happens, and I mean, my big brother here can probably explain later. What then happens is, for instance, if you now remove subsidy in Nigeria today, somebody may come in 2 years' time and tell you, oh, we are not seeing the effect. It's because all the reallocation of economic resources that would have happened if it was done at the right time, we will struggle to do that. PIA is another example. We were on PIA for almost 20 years. We never got around to passing the policy. We've been on land reforms for God knows decades. We've been on state police or community policing forever. I mean, why are our policy adjustments so slow? Because our politics is wrong. The second element of that politics is not only just that our policy adjustments are slow, but it's also because they are not localized. What do I mean by that? So you have this humongous, be it all federal government, just controlling everyone's lives. Whether I have light in Lagos is federal government. Whether I have roads in Lagos is federal government. Whether I get a mortgage in Lagos. So if you actually look at some policies, why are we not able to dimension our policy to the most relevant areas? So when they are slow to adjustment, we are also not localizing our policies, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's security, whether it's agriculture. So there are so many things that we could do if we could just align our politics with the incentives that are required for us to develop, and of course, ensure that our policies, we adjust them as quickly as possible. We live in a dynamic global world and we have to keep responding. The people that have developed, as you said in your presentation, they are still changing their policies every day. But we are just stuck in 40 years ago. And of course, let's try and localize our policy making. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we need to get the right incentives for policy development. We need to speed up the process and the adjustment to the process, and we need to localize. Thank you very much. Now I'll go to Mr. Taiwo Oyedele.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I think I want to speak to one or two issues as part of my opening remarks. And that is, number one is to do with Nigeria's economic philosophy or lack thereof. I'm tempted to ask the people in the room a question. I don't know whether to go ahead. That question is, many of us have seen the manifestos of the leading political parties. Seen, just seen. Okay? About 2 or 4. How many have read? Of course, if you haven't seen it, you wouldn't have read. Someone says, why bother reading? Even the candidate themselves have not read. You know? But for those of us who are interested and keeping hope alive about Nigeria, we are reading all of it. We don't know which one will work. But it's already clear to me that not much will change in 2023. If what we're seeing and reading is anything to go by, we have a fundamental problem with our economic philosophy. Our leaders think that our problems require money for them to be solved. That's a big problem. Look at the NDP 2021 to 2025. They're looking for 350 trillion naira. To do what? PDP presidential candidate says $10 billion fund for women and youth. For what? I saw the one for Labour Party, the same thing, fund. Everybody thinks you must find money to solve Nigeria's problem. Nigeria's problem has nothing to do with money, or rather, money is incidental. The fundamental problem is policies. It's policies, if you don't design them well, it's irrelevant how they are implemented, right? If you design them well and they're not properly implemented, they're not worth the paper on which they're written on. If you design them well and they're properly implemented and you don't monitor, you don't know when you're making the right impact. There's so much focus on activities and efforts. We have done this. We've given money to 1 million Nigerians. If not for us, Nigeria would have collapsed. If only you know what the PDB would have done. If not for us, who cares? What is the outcome? You're fighting poverty, but more people are getting into poverty. You're still singing your praise. It's even more painful and annoying to me personally as a Nigerian that we then give them, no, not we, they give themselves awards and recognition for the monumental failure. And then the rest of us go around like everything is normal. I don't get it. We have to all first start by understanding what those problems are. I think we can mention them, but I don't know whether we fully understand them so that we can then say collaboratively, is our problem? Collaboratively, how do we begin to solve those problems? So I commend Neca'S for what you're doing. And I hope I have the opportunity subsequently to tell you about some of my ideas in terms of how we can make meaningful impacts. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And one thing that has come through Dr. O's comment and yours is that politics, we don't have the politics right. And you're right. I did read the manifestos and the plans of the different parties, and it was a bit disappointing to see that it seems like none of them understands what the issues are and how to begin to solve those issues. And yes, we'll have the opportunity to prefer solutions to those. And with that, I'll come to Dr. Muda Yusuf. Your initial thoughts, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me express my appreciation to Neca'S. And let me also acknowledge the very fantastic presentation of Prof. You know, when a professor has spoken, if you don't want to go beyond your boundary, I just don't go near the presentation. So I will not, of course, very brilliant presentation, but I will not, discuss the presentation. I would rather look at what the policy space has been over the years and how that has contributed to all the challenges that we have. Now, policies don't cost money. And that's one good thing about policy. And policy can change a whole lot of things. There was a time, one of our members, when I was still in the chamber, took this CBN intervention fund, couple of billions of naira. He set up a plant. About 2 or 3 months into the operation, there was a CBN policy that now imposed a ban on the raw materials he was using for that plant. It was the CBN that gave the loan. It was CBN that came up with a policy that now imposed a ban on the raw material. So you can imagine the kind of trauma that kind of investor had gone through and is possibly still going through now. He possibly have mortgaged some properties and all of that. I know what the banking system is. The interest will be running. They no send. It's not their business what problems you have. So the policy environment is very, very critical, and we cannot overstate its importance. We now have an economy where those who are doing business ethically are finding it extremely difficult to survive. It's partly also a policy problem. The currency brokers, the middlemen, the rent seekers are making more money in this economy than the real entrepreneurs. That is the tragedy of the Nigerian economy. Talk to people who are doing things right. listen to their lamentation. And we have an economic policy environment. You wonder whether we have any economists in government, or even sometimes even in CBN. You wonder. When the Naira note was, new Naira note was being presented, a lot of ceremony, the president read a speech. And one of the highlights of the content of the speech was that this new Naira note is going to help to fight inflation. I mean, coming from the president of it, this is a speech written at the presidency. How can changing whether the color, because people said it's just the color that they change, how is that going to fight inflation? And we have an economic advisor. I'm not sure he's been consulted because I know doing Salami very well. We have the Presidential Committee on the Economy. We have the Economic Advisory Council. So you wonder who is actually feeding the policy process. Because the policy configuration, most of the times, are completely disconnected from even rudimentary economics. That is what we are seeing. And sometimes some of our policymakers say that it's homegrown economic model. We have had that severally. I had an encounter with a multinational company. They needed Forex. The banks they approached said unless they can pay some top-up per dollar, it will be different account. I think we can get allocation. I'm sure those of us in business are familiar with all of these things. And it's so rampant, done with such impunity, as if it has almost become a normal thing. And because of the high corporate governance standard of these institutions and many other institutions, they cannot touch that kind of transaction. And many of them are suffering today, seriously. I also had an interaction with an airline. Their funds are stuck here again because of fraud policies. They wanted to transfer the funds. They approached a number of banks. They said, well, officially, you can pay this amount. Unofficially, you have to pay this per dollar. It's an airline. So there is this rot all over the place. A lot of it has to do with policy. And we have a long list of policy issues. We have the Forex policy. We have the monetary policy. We have the trade policy. In trade policy, the CBN has its own policy. The finance ministry has its own policy. Which one are we going to take?
Thank you very much.
So there is so much confusion.
Yes.
And going forward, I think we have to be specific about each of these policy elements and see how they can review them and make suggestions along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. We need to drive a synergy between the different policies within the same government. We need to have the same policy direction, the same objectives. Thank you very much. And then I'll come to Josh. Yes, I mean, he's talked about the consultants. I said I'll take it easy on you, but maybe not, because I see you sometimes, you know, in those government meetings. So you play a role, and then Mr. Taiwo as well. So I'm coming for you. What do you say to them in these government meetings? What advice do you give to them? Or are you the ones giving them the advice that is impacting what we're seeing right now? Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Victoria. So I will go back to your question. I will look at our role in this process. So you asked the question, where do we need to go as a nation and how do we get there? And I want to align your question to the initial presentation made by Professor. So at the end of the day, you cannot actually achieve anything if you don't have the mind and the end in mind, right? So as a nation, what do we have in mind as the end goal? Then we can go back to coming up with a paradigm and a set of policies that we can then execute and monitor to achieve that end goal. So clearly, if you look at the presentation, the end goal has to be increasing the standard of living of our people. And once you do that, you elevate people from poverty to be able to afford basic necessities of life. That is the end goal. Now, it then begs the question, how do you achieve that? And what we've seen based on this presentation and empirical evidence backs it, China is an example, is you need to have sustained high economic growth. All right. This sustainability of that high economic growth that over time alleviates people. When it's volatile, today you get 7%, next time you have a recession and you get back up, you ain't getting it. All right. So how do you achieve that? So the way I look at things from the short term, medium term, and long term. Today, the next government is going to inherit a global economy that is struggling with inflation. All right. And inflation erodes our purchasing power. If you have a job and inflation is high, your purchasing power erodes and your standard of living drops. And that's the reason why more and more people have entered into the poverty line, under the poverty line in Nigeria because of high inflation. In addition to the fact that over the past, since 2014, where we had a GDP growth rate of about 5%, which was around 6.2, we've had GDP growth rate below 3% up until last year, 2021. And when we got that 3.4%, it was because of a base effect, because the previous year you had a contraction. So if it's low, definitely it's going to grow higher than before. It doesn't mean that our standard of living actually improved. Now you compare that to population growth rate on an average of 2.5. So since 2015, if you've been growing below 3%, but your population growth rate has been consistent at 2.5%. That means per capita income has been eroding, even before inflation came in. So we have a situation whereby the people of this country are really suffering. All right, so how do you achieve that? So how do you achieve sustained economic growth whilst maintaining a low inflation rate? Now, inflation rate, as we check, is it 20.9, almost 21%? You know, the last data we had in terms of Q3 GDP growth rate was 2.5 thereabout, or 2.25. So we're still hovering lower than, the GDP growth rate. So how do we do that? First and foremost is to stop the bleeding. To stop the bleeding means you need to stabilize the macroeconomy. And as Professor Bongo said, that doesn't actually lead to economic growth, but it's a necessary condition for the economic growth to take off. So how do you do that? Make sure you bring inflation down and make sure that you deal with issues like this exchange rate misalignment, which leads to rent-seeking behavior and distortion in the market, which leads to inappropriate resource allocation. People are making money not through productive process. If I have access to the official rate of 100 and something, and I turn around and I sell it for 700, I've made money, but there was no production that took place, even though I made money. How do I then alleviate people from poverty when I didn't produce anything to employ people and then improve their standard of living? So what you see is high inequality. People are rich, but they are few because the process of making that money did not create any good or service, and you didn't create any employment through that process. So those things need to be dealt with. Now, once we've dealt with that, the government has to create an enabling environment for the business sector to thrive. We talked about infrastructure gap that we need to bridge. One area that Professor Bongo stressed on, I think is critical, is human capital. The factors of production are labor and capital, right? And you have land, which is pretty much fixed. Labor has to be augmented through education and access to technology for labor to be productive and produce more over a limited period of time. And that has to be done. But where you have people jappering, that's a good word. I'm not Nigerian, but I'm learning the Nigerian lingo. When people are leaving the country through to brain drain and leads to production and productivity reducing, then that becomes a problem. So I think it's a mindset. We need to have that paradigm clearly. What is the end goal? End goal is to ensure that we have sustained high economic growth, just like China did over almost 3 decades of having economic growth rate of double digits, which then push a lot of people out of poverty that today they are pretty much an economic power that even the West has to contend with. That should be the mindset. And size matters. Nigeria is the largest economy in terms of population size. If China could do it, Nigeria can do it here. So I think the mindset is important, have the right paradigm, have the right people to implement these decent policies. Without them and without monitoring, as my good friend Taiwo said, we ain't going anywhere.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You've preferred quite a number of solutions to help us attain a level of sustained economic growth and development. And that brings me to the reason why we're here. We're businesses and we want our businesses to grow. And part of the challenges that we've been having as businesses is an enabling environment, the infrastructure, the access to foreign exchange, the whole ease of doing business. We've talked about the problem with the seaports. We've talked about the problem with excise duties, with duties at the port, there's so much going on. Now, we know that all of these can be driven by policy. And as you've just said, Josh, you've talked about, stopping the bleeding, and then, really ensuring that we have the right human capital to do this. So I'm going to start, I'm going to start from Mr. Taiwo. Here we want to look at what suggestions, what would you propose to the incoming government, or the few months left for the government that is here right now? Where do you see those divergences? Where do you see those problems between policies? Especially when we look at some things coming out of the CBN and the policies coming from the Ministry of Finance, the policies coming from the Ministry of Agriculture, all are supposed to do the same thing, but they seem to be working at counter purposes. What suggestions will you give? How can we bring this all together to realign, to start from there? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So I've spent a lot of time with governments, trying to make my own little contribution, and it's frustrating, I have to tell you. To your comment about whether we are the one advising them. I wish I'm the one advising them. I wish they listen. Nigeria's problem, the problems are complex, but the solutions are largely very simple. So I'll tell you three things that, in my view, are the foundation of our problems, and they're also the solutions that we're looking for. Number one is data-driven policies. We don't have it in Nigeria. If I want to do a scale of 1 to 100, we're less than 10%. People just talk. People just make decisions, and you're wondering. And I'll give you, I know there's no time, but let me give you two quick examples. The government said they want to impose more excise duties on non-alcoholic beverages because there are 12 million people with diabetes and they are dying. So let's impose more taxes. I say, okay, have you seen the data that says the World Health Organization, it's not like zero sugar is good for you, right? Your body needs sugar. The World Health Organization says 9.1 kilogram per annum is what is ideal. Don't exceed that. Nigeria is doing 8 kilogram, right? Number two, in countries where they have universal access to healthcare, what it means is that the people contribute into a purse from where they take care of everyone. So if my lifestyle means that I'm taking more from that pool to take care of myself, government says, actually, you need to pay more tax. And that makes sense, isn't it? In Nigeria, this is how it plays out. My lifestyle is causing medical problem for me. Government says, let's impose more tax on this guy. So they collect the more tax from me. When I fall sick, me and my family also take care of myself. How is that making sense? Data-driven decision. Number two, by the way, before we got the exemption for small businesses from VAT, we had to use data. Government had the information, they didn't process it. We found out that 97% of VAT was contributed by 3% of the taxpayers, right? Which means all the other 97% were paying less than the cost of collection. Number two is inclusive approach. Somebody gets into government today, they think that the following day, they are smarter than everybody else in Nigeria. They just write rules and then we figure it out along the line. Most times, the damage would have been done. So the inclusive approach means private sector, civil society, industry players, government people, international, include everybody. Number three is coordination. That coordination has to be both vertical and horizontal. You see government pulling in different directions. CBN was going to recolor, we didn't know it was recoloring. They were going to recolor the Naira. Finance minister said, I heard like everybody heard. Then the president said, by the way, I approved it. CBN governor said, well, I have no reason to come for your approval. That's not the point. The point is that this particular matter has legs everywhere. Coordinates. It does not take anything away from you. For example, by the way, this thing about, which is why I think, Dr. Muda Yusuf is saying it's not going to address any inflation. He said there's 3 trillion outside that is not within the banking system. By the way, is all your currency supposed to be within the banking system? Now, the money in circulation is 50 trillion, and you are sweating over 3. If you find that 3 and you bring it in, like we've seen on social media, we don't know whether it's true or not. If there's plenty of money that they cannot explain, isn't there a fiscal aspect to it? In fact, the first person that should show up is the tax man that says you have these 200 billion, sir. Where's the evidence of the tax you paid before? First, we collect the tax before we now ask you, where did you find the money in the first place? So those 3 things, data-driven decision, inclusive approach, and coordination are extremely important. In 1 minute, what do I think that NECA should do? A few things. Number 1, also building on those factors that I have seen. NECA needs to build an institutional capacity for sustained, proactive, and effective policy engagement. Each of those words, I have carefully chosen them because me as an individual, I find that sometimes I have to do a lot to find the data to give to government. Me, that my resources is like a drop in the ocean compared to what government has. If government is not going to change by 2023, we need to fix the problem ourselves. You guys need to consider bringing all private sector together. Maybe somebody should create, the private sector's organizations of Nigeria, so that when you speak, nobody can ignore you, right? I think NECA even wants to change their name, right? Because people still think you're talking about employees and employment alone. And then see whether we can actually promote, let's sponsor a law to legislate this inclusive approach so that they cannot do it without the private sector, right? Let's see the lawmaker that will say this law cannot go. Let's write it so that in any important economic decision, the private sector must have a voice. That voice must be heard. It must be considered. Somebody has to do some explaining if they move on without the private sector. And finally, we cannot go to sleep. We must monitor, provide constructive feedback, and viable alternatives. Otherwise, we'll be going around in circles. I know that NECA wants to do something. You're doing something already. You can count on people like me and many of us here who will work with you because at the end of the day, it's our country. Not all of us can japa. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Because Dr. Muda actually talked about government not listening and all of that. I'm wondering where it's all coming from. I was going to ask you that. And the suggestion that NECA builds a coalition to sponsor a law to institutionalize that inclusion. I mean, earlier today, we're having some discussions, and before the last, the current government came in power, we did engage, and we agreed on, and it was said, oh, yes, we'll ensure that you're included. And then how can we make them listen, even when we start pushing for these laws? And I'd like to ask Dr. Muda, how do you suggest that we engage and approach to ensure that private sector gets the ear of the government, which is what we want? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think it's about strengthening advocacy. Although there are issues on both sides. If you have the wrong person sitting at the other end, it can be a problem. I'm saying this because I've been at a consultative forum where a regulator, I know a typical regulator is very overbearing, sometimes very intimidating. And because there is also no recourse for redress, we incur the wrath of a regulator, then you are in trouble. Your shareholders will now begin to take you to task. That why are you declaring losses or something? So it's a question of the quality, first of the leader at the very top, the quality of the appointees that are manning the critical positions, who have very clear understanding, because when you are talking to somebody who doesn't understand, And unfortunately, the person has so much powers. It's a very big risk. When you empower somebody who is ignorant, a lot of damage will be done. So the quality of appointees is very, very critical, and we need to emphasize that to incoming administration. It's not just a question of people who are nice or people who generated or who donated the most to the campaign funds, or people who are your relations or your friends. This technical input into policy process is key. So that when you are engaging, you know that you are engaging with somebody who understands. Somebody who doesn't feel intimidated or feeling that you want to show that you know. So that is very key. Then on the private sector level, we also need to have what we call evidence-based advocacy. Just as Taiwo said, you need data, you need evidence. You don't just go out there and say, this is what you want, this is what you don't want. You need that evidence, you know? And for some authorities, sometimes you need to take your case to the public domain. I'm saying this because when I was in the chamber, there were instances, we write memo, we write this, sometimes you don't even get an acknowledgement. Or you get an acknowledgement maybe 3, 4, 5 months after you have written the thing. But if I go on air and speak about some of these things or just address a press conference, the following day, you'll be getting some call, why did you do this? Can't you come and see us and so on? So depending on the situation, depending on the issue, we should have our various options of advocacy. But advocacy is extremely very, very important. And let me emphasize, individual companies cannot do it because of the character of the political actors. So we need strong advocacy institutions. We'll be able to speak without fear of anything to some of these authorities. Because what we have seen over time is that government agencies, they just throw all manner of policies at us. Everybody is struggling with it. People are going behind to go and bribe, sort themselves out, and the economy is suffering. Because these things slow down investment. Just as the paper presented, if investment is not growing, the economy cannot perform. You cannot create jobs. So that is my response. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good response. Yeah. And you did mention that, I mean, once you get on air and you grant one interview, and the calls start coming in. So that brings me to you, Dr. Okiti. You've worked close to the government as well. And of course, you're the chief executive at BusinessDay right now. Sometimes we have to put that pressure on. Sometimes we have to use that way of putting pressure on the government. Sometimes it might backfire, right? So from your experiences on both sides, how do we prepare ahead of time? Yes, Dr. Taiwo, Mr. Taiwo has talked about, data. He's talked about, the person on the other end, when they are difficult, when it seems impossible, what do we do? How do we approach? How do we engage, leveraging media as part of our advocacy tools?
How do we engage the media? Is that what you're saying? Okay, engage it. Okay. So I think we are all talking, since we are all talking about the future, so let me first of all calm our nerves a bit. We have elections in February, and we have some leading candidates. So from my own perspective, it depends on who you support, and whoever I support, I'm not going to reveal that yet because I'm a journalist. But what I can tell you as a journalist is any of them is better than what we have now. You can take it to the bank. Any of them is better than what we have now. So we have had complete disaster, but any of them is better than what we have. And I'm talking about what Muda said. You cannot grow beyond your head. You can't. My children can't grow beyond Okiti. It's the Okiti, is me, they see. They can't grow beyond. When I mean they can't grow beyond me, they will grow. But what I mean, I don't know how to explain what I'm saying. I can't give them holidays in Bahamas. Do you get my point? I don't give myself holidays in Bahamas, so I can't give them. So next year, any of the candidates is better, more knowledgeable, more understanding, more receptive to what is required. I'm not saying they are perfect, just as I said, but they are better than what we have now. You're not going to have Buhari's exchange rate at 400 and something, and you have markets at 700 and something. It's just not going to happen. So that's number one. Number two, meaning that it makes engagement easier. Number two, I wholeheartedly support your approach to policy making in government. And that is the way we should engage government. But I must also mention one of few things, and I will try and say it in a way that we kind of understand. In the US, where lobby is very, very extensive, very, very extensive. In fact, absolutely extensive. However, if you notice, most of the lobby is on industry regulation. Okay, good. But in Nigeria, the lobby would undertake is BusinessDay lobby. There are two different things. Most of the business people here, when they go to government, they don't talk about their industry, they talk about their companies. So we also need to move away from that and speak as industry. On Saturday, I met with, I won't mention, but it was agriculture. I met with one of the producers, big agriculture firms in Nigeria. And I said to him, I said, look, there are ways in which we can do big agriculture investment and combine it with smallholder investment. But why is it that all of you cannot come together and approach the government and let them stop wasting money on this smallholder, this thing that nobody knows what is happening there? He agreed with me, but trust me, if the same company approaches the government, they'll say, oh, BusinessDay agriculture can do this. Not that big agriculture firms can do this. So that is the problem with the private sector as well. We tend to go to government, not as industry, but we tend to go as individual companies. I'm sure you would expect that as a journalist, I would have heard this. I meet CEOs every day, except I don't go out. I meet CEOs every day. It's not one, it's not two, it's not three. They have told me that if this one enter the government, my business will be good. If this one enter the government, my business will be good. They did not say industry regulation will change. So we are all our problems as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And this is where we come in. Support for the OPS, support for NECA, support for an industry approach. As long as we don't do that, I don't think that we're going to get anywhere with this economy. And yes, part of what we're planning as an outcome of this engagement, this dialogue that we're having today, is to draw a policy document, and we're going to start engaging those who are in the fray right now, who want to be in government. And we want to go as industry. And part of what we've discussed as well is to align as OPS. We have several OPS organizations to come together, so we're all speaking with one voice. I think we have a meeting soon, and I'm sure that all these inputs that you're making today will be very useful to put together a document in a sensible way. Now we know that the growth of businesses is not just about the businesses. It's not even just about the industry. As the keynote speaker mentioned, poverty, human capital development, all of that is based on the economy growing. And so the critical thing for us is to have that enabling environment. And we've all spoken to that. Josh gave us some practical steps that we can take. Mr. Taiwo came through with some steps, Dr. Muda, Dr. Ogho. We have so many ideas of what we're going to do. Now there comes a part where it's us now. Coming together as industry or looking at ourselves as just businesses. And so we position ourselves as a cash cows that can be taken advantage of by everybody within the sector. So what role can we play, even as individuals? First of all, from being conscious of what's going on, by speaking up where we have to, and also by ensuring that we do what we need to do. Yes, Dr. Muda also mentioned where doing business ethically seems to put you in the limelight, and so you're victimized, basically, in inverted commas, for doing that. So there's so much that we've discussed today. Now putting it all together, we're at a point where the next elections are coming. Whichever government comes in is better than what we have today. That's hope. Great. So in the final, whichever individual comes in is better than what we have today. Okay, great. So now we're looking at stopping the bleeding, enabling environment. But there's one key thing that we have not looked at, and the keynote speakers spoke to that, the corruption problem. Everything we've discussed will make sense, but the corruption challenge, just 2 minutes from every one of us. Because our keynote speaker said he didn't know the answer. So we need to find the answer. The corruption problem. What do we need to do? Practical terms, what do we need to do? And I'll start from you, Josh, and then we'll go around like that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I think corruption is a problem. I fully agree with that. My only problem with the emphasis on corruption when it comes to election periods is that it's the easiest way that politicians are able to tap into the sentiments of the electorate and then make them feel that the fact that they are seemingly not corrupt, that means they are competent. In fact, what we are voting you to do is more of competency than the corruption. Because if you are competent, you surround yourself with people who actually buy into your vision, and the probability of corruption will be low. But when you are incompetent, you might not even be corrupt, but your administration could be corrupt because you really don't understand what is going on. So they actually are going to go on these corrupt practices under your nose because you really don't understand it. And I don't want to give examples both in my home country and over here. But what I think is important, and I think the presenter talked about, is choosing the right people with the right capabilities and capacity to actually be in government and lead us. So competence should be at the forefront in terms of that individual leader and the construction of his team around him. Once you have competent people, that you might have some, rotten apples, but by and large, if they are competent, you see the results. You might be able to achieve your sustained growth and lift people out of poverty. I don't think we can say that there's no corruption in America. I don't think we can say that there's no corruption in China, but are they getting results? Because they have competent people doing what they're supposed to do to achieve the end goal. So corruption is a problem. We need to work on it. I think what is going to be extremely important in us achieving our long-term objective of sustained high economic growth and alleviating people from poverty is people who are competent and hopeless, selfless. Hopefully they are selfless and want to help others and not just themselves.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, corruption thrives in an environment where there are no consequences. I mean, when the very obviously corrupt people are even contesting to lead the country, and it can happen. Some of them could emerge. So we have an environment where there are no consequences for corruption. So there's a need for an entire change in orientation to ensure that we are not celebrating corruption. And that is what is happening. Either at the village level, in the churches, in the mosque, once you have money, that's it. It doesn't matter how you got the money. So that is something that is endemic. Then from a policy point of view, policy also creates corruption. We just talk about Forex. You have a demand of, say, maybe 100 billion. You have a supply of maybe 20 billion. And somebody is sitting, has the powers to be deciding who gets what. That's a recipe for corruption. To allocate. The same thing is happening with the fuel subsidy. You have a monopoly structure, which is the NNPC. There's not enough fuel to go around. The marketers have to go and bribe their way here and there to get allocation. They have to factor the bribery into their costs. And you come back and say they should go and sell at official rate. How would they sell at official rate? So the policy environment needs to be right. It has to be transparent. And as much as possible, we should avoid monopoly situations. Monopolies can be very oppressive. As much as possible, we should push the country into a space where we have more competition across all sectors. The higher the level of competition, the lower the chances of corruption. We know what it is with NITEL to get a line in NITEL. We know what it is today. You know, so the structure of the environment, the structure of the economy also has a way of helping to tackle corruption.
Thank you, sir.
And we should have systems that prevent corruptions. Not after the money has been stolen. You're now going to change currency and say you are looking for those who looted the money. You should be more preventive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Taiwo.
Yes, I think, corruption is everywhere. It's the magnitude that is different. I like to look at corruption as not being the problem, but rather the symptom of a broken system, right? So in the sense that on one hand, we see people who have stolen billions of naira and we say they're corrupt, but in fact, majority of Nigerians, and I say that with all sense of responsibility, majority of Nigerians are corrupt. So there's a public acceptance for corruption. Somebody will say, now where you they work, now you they shop. The person at the gates is trying to find something. The person counting inventory wants to get something. Somebody gets their own POS to get payments in a company where they work. In fact, there are people who think if you get to power today, they are not celebrating because they think you're going to fix Nigeria. Because they are close to you, they expect something should come, right? We have to address that. Lack of consequences is another one. How do we solve it? One, we need to start calling it out. Let's not celebrate things that people cannot explain the sources. Number two, we need, and Dr. Muda said that, systemic solutions. You cannot find two people and give to EFCC and put in the press. They're not fighting any corruption. You're fighting a few people that you claim are corrupt. That's two different things. So think about procurement in Nigeria. How can you introduce e-government? Why do I have to see someone face-to-face to process my international passport, driver's license, my permit to do my business? If I can do all of that online and there's an audit trail of if you are delaying me unnecessarily with consequences, those things will be fixed. Why don't we have the audit service bill? The lawmakers, it's not like I trust them. They were saying recently that the Auditor General for the Federation, the kind of allocation to that office is the out of pocket for many other agencies. How are they supposed to monitor what government is doing? So those are the things I think we should do to address corruption.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's anything new I want to say. I will just probably say things differently. I'll go a step further than Taiwo. We are all corrupt. Not many. We are all corrupt. Simple. The day we accept that we are all corrupt, that's the day we start making progress. So that's number one, because it was locked out and that said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So what is this? The reason we are all corrupt is because we all, in our different capacities, arrogate powers to ourselves. We arrogate powers to ourselves. The presidential powers is just too much. It's just too much. Even if you put a saint there, it's just too tempting. The powers is too much. The power to change people's lives. Yes, the power to just automatically change people's lives. You should not give those kind of powers to any individual. because they will never exercise those power rightly all the time. So, number two, I'll just go with what Muda said. Policies, policies, policies. The examples I always give is that, look, and I think I've written articles like 2 or 3 about we are all corrupt. So, for instance, in Abuja, I use the word Abuja. How many of us are familiar with land allocation in Abuja? That is the classic example of Nigeria corruption. The land allocation in Abuja is vested in the Minister of FCT. Who appoints the minister? The president. So where is the land allocation vested? Bam, that's it. So when you become whoever you want to become, you go to the minister and the minister allocates. And you think if I become minister, no, I'm not saying I want to become minister, but sincerely, I do not have a house in Abuja. But do you think if I become a minister today, I will now allocate land? I mean, it's just but that time you will say I'm not corrupt because that power they've given me that power. So let's deal with all the policies that we know, like you're saying, NMPC, allocation, this one, allocation. And that allocation is sitting in one person's office. There is no policy for that allocation. There is no procedure for the allocation. You have to see the individual for the allocation. The demand is much greater than the supply. Even if he goes to church on Sunday morning and come to work on Monday morning, he would have forgotten that he prayed now. That's number one. Then number two, let's not forget. And I will say this, and this is probably the thing I will say. I worked in the Office of Chief Economic Advisor for 4 years. Before then, I was in BusinessDay. In that 4 years, this is very interesting. In the 4 years, 2 of those years, I was paid by AMCON, meaning I was working for government, but AMCON was paying my salary. The reason special assistants do that is because the government salary is considered not enough, right? Then the following 2 years, it was the Central Bank of Nigeria that paid my salary, also for the same purpose. But when we lost election in 2015, nobody asked me, what are you doing next? So anybody that comes after me knew what happened to me. What do you think they would do? You take care of yourself ahead of time because that was actually what you were supposed to do. Don't just collect salary. Hey, boy, help yourself because you don't know what will happen. So these are issues. We need to deal with those salient issues. And until then, it looks as if, people are just doing what it is a symptom. The system is broken, totally broken. But the only thing I don't say and I'm keep quiet now, when I say all of us are corrupt, the only thing is not all of us have the powers to change the system. And that's the excuse I give you, and that's the excuse I give me until you get into government. When you get into government, I will not give you that excuse again. But I give myself the excuse. I don't have the power to change the system. So I can only do what I can within my little area. But don't blame me and say, I'm responsible for Nigerian corruption. Yes, we are all corrupt. I'm not responsible. Let the people that have the powers to change it, change the system for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've been awesome panelists, awesome discussions, awesome learning today. And then the issue of corruption is like indiscipline. I mean, in Nigeria, driving in Lagos will jump the traffic lights. Don't care about the zebra crossing. But take the same Nigerian to London, he will obey all the rules. Why? Because there is a system that ensures that there are consequences for whatever action you take. So that needs to be there. Competence, consequence, transparency, the issue of monopoly and allocations. So yes, we have policies, but what are the basis of those policies? They need to be redesigned to address the real issues that we have today. Thank you very much. And now we can take some questions from the audience. So if you have questions, let's take those. Yes, sir. While we get ready for the questions, please let's note the hands.
Now,
raised so that we
you
can
know,
take
the theme is about policy. And I think we also need to, at least going forward, coming up with a document that is very specific to policy issues. So if you have a document on foreign exchange policy, what kind of forex policy do we want to see? Or monetary policy? Is it this endless tightening of monetary policy that you want to see? On tax policy, Taiwo is here. Free consultancy. What kind of tax policy will be good for business? On trade policy, what kind of trade policy? Is it this kind of parallel policy where the CBN has its own, the finance minister has its own, and all sorts of things? Industrial policy. What kind of industrial policy do we want? Should we not be looking at maybe resource-based industrialization? What kind of concessions should we be giving to our manufacturers? In terms of equipment, in terms of raw materials. Of course, we have agri policy, energy policy. This electricity issue, there's a whole huge opportunity for investment in electricity. What kind of policy can deliver, can unlock value, unlock investment in electricity space? Energy space, oil and gas, we have discussed the issue of subsidy. How can we also unlock investment? There's a whole lot of opportunities in oil and gas across the entire chain, upstream, downstream. But policy problems are the issue. Then we have PPP. How do we unlock private capital to finance infrastructure? We need policy around that. You know, I think those are the, I just feel that we need to zero in on some specific policies in our final outcomes. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that all that will come into the document that is being prepared by the OPC, fuel subsidy, backward integration, import substitution. There's quite a lot. So, I mean, thank you for offering your services as experts in all those fields, and we'll put them together. Thank you. So we'll take the questions. I think the first hand I saw was here, and there's here. Okay, and then finally, yes. We'll start from there. Yes, the lady. So we'll start from
the mic is here. Just for people who are joining us online, in between, this is once again the National Economic Dialogue posted by NECA, promoting a novel approach to policy design, implementation, and monitoring for 2023. We appreciate everybody who has been on this conversational journey so far. So this is just to welcome people who joined midstream. Thank you. We'll start with the gentleman here.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say a big thank you to NECA for this program. Our prof did a very good job, the panelists. Now, it seems we all agree that policies, of course, there are issues, that we're good at making policies in Nigeria. But of course, we know the issue about policies so and so. But the key challenge I want to ask is that he was talking about the need to incentivize or insensitize people to implement the policies. So what do we need to do to ensure that the civil servants and those in authority implement sound policies? Thank you.
Yes, let's take 2 more questions, then we'll answer those and then take the next round. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I'd like to commend NECA for being innovative in sensitizing the stakeholders on what is important about promoting policy and its implementation. Because this is key. Most associations come in and don't have ideas, and they continue with their sort of isomorphic mimicry, to quote a word from Prof. Banjo. So this kind of discussion is novel and is highly appreciated, because if we don't come together, they will continue to shave our heads in our absence. And this kind of putting ideas, coming together and discussing will go a long way in our advocacy in this country.
was found out in the past that each association goes on their own individually, and government won't listen to them like that. But we've come together and make sure the president of NECA is on the Federal Executive Council. I mean, why? The decision is for us. And we don't have a representative at the Federal Executive Council. In India, you find out that all associations, no government will take a decision without involving them. And they have associations that provide IGR to the government. All these unnecessary parastatals are under different associations. Government doesn't handle them. This is way out to see that economic development goes down to grassroots. We are here. We brought out South Africa through apartheid, and South Africa has 50,000 megawatts of electricity. This is why industry start growing. We are still here managing with 4,000 megawatts electricity, and we say we're industry, and they start giving us palliatives that we're economic giant of Africa, and we sit down and we laugh and we are happy. This is not development. So my hope is that something novel will continue to be done so that we achieve our advocacy purposes in this country. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shola Obademu. I just want to ask a question, basically. I look at again, a fantastic forum. I congratulate NECA, I congratulate all the panelists and the moderator. National Economic Dialogue, promoting a novel approach to policy design, implementation, and monitoring. To me, this kind of theme or topic cannot really be discussed exclusively to the public sector. And I wonder, how many public sector representatives do we have here? This is supposed to be a private sector, public sector engagement. And it's like we are talking to ourselves. The ordinary business people in Nigeria are not the causes of Nigerian problems when it comes to these critical issues. Government has a fundamental role to play in making sure that this is fixed in a way that businesses can benefit from. And this has been going on for some time. I recall that the Economic Summit Group thing started from Lagos, but was moved to Lagos, moved to Abuja to enable whoever is the president of this country to be present. And what do we have? Do the presidents, do they come to the Economic Summit Group, the meetings? They don't. Somebody represents the president, and as soon as he reads this boring speech, I'm pleased to be here today, blah, blah, blah. Then he walks out immediately after the opening session, and all the ministers that are there, all the heads of MDAs, they go out with him. Half of the hall, people from Lagos, most people that are there are from Lagos anyway, they are running after one minister or the other for their private problems. By the time the second session starts, where these deep presentations are supposed to be presented, the hall is about 25% full. I think in making sure that the takeaways from this kind of gatherings are meaningful, the public sector has to be adequately represented. My modest contribution, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Matthew Azoji. I want to appreciate NECA leadership for this session and for all the presenters and the panel. The keynote speaker said something about the capacity of government, of the state, to drive development. That is always what is the focus. And Dr. Josh also said something about competence of leadership. But my question is, what is the importance of character of leadership and commitment of leadership to create the enabling environment that will ensure sustainable development? I think that what is lacking a lot in a country like Nigeria is that the top leadership have not given the level of commitment that is required to ensure that they create an environment that ensures compliance that will be sustainable to create that kind of environment that will create development. And how do you also sustain this kind of, if we have a leader that's able to do that, how do we sustain it from one government to another government over a time? Like the keynote speaker talked about Asia. We have seen sustainable development over many years in Asian countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neca and the panelists, for these very rich conversations. My name is Ugochi. I have two questions. So my first question is, how do we empower people, individuals, and also the organized private sector to be able to create some kind of influence? I listened to the keynote speaker say some things about how from where he sits, he cannot really make some kind of change because he does not have the power to. And just listening to that, to be honest, it feels very frustrating to be in a country, to be part of the system, to be impacted by the decisions that are made, and just not be able to, in whatsoever capacity, be able to drive some kind of change and influence. So since we're talking about a novel approach, what can we do to empower the people more and also to empower the organized private sector? I know that when Mr. Taiwo was speaking, he had asked a question about how many people had seen the manifesto for the different political parties. And we can just see how much there's a disconnect between the people and the leadership. People are not even interested. What can we do to change that? Then my second question is with respect to what the keynote speaker mentioned about people approaching the government for their own personal business, as opposed to speaking up or advocating for the industry. What action plan can be put in place to make sure that we begin to change that narrative so that advocacy begins to be done from an industry level and not people stepping up to the government for their own personal interest? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Alex Kemena. I work for Center for Financial Journalism. Fortunately, the question I want to ask was already addressed by my brother here, but he did not drill down to the very core of the problem that the Nigerian state represents. The Nigerian state is not really a state, but a special purpose vehicle for a group of people to capture and use for their own ends. And my question would have been directed to the guest speaker, that given the evolution of the Nigerian state up to the present time, from the military era to the civilian era in which we are today, have we ever noticed fundamental change in the character and nature of the state to drive a development model that can bring us out of poverty that we have been wallowing in for the past decades? For instance, the level of poverty in this country is mind-boggling. And all policies that have been crafted over time have not been able to lift a page out of what you have as this mind-boggling poverty. You have a government that came on the piggyback of, I want change, anchored on 3 legs: fight insecurity, fight corruption, and bring about economic development. The 2 terms of that government is nearing an end, just few months to go. And you ask yourself, what have you been able to achieve on each of these 3 legs that have changed the dynamics of the country, that have produced a new trajectory? So when we are discussing this kind of issue, I think we should be very, objective and be fearless in speaking to the issue at stake. The problem of corruption is a byproduct of a state that cannot punish corruption. There is nothing you can do. People will steal left, right, and center. But if you have a state that punishes corruption through the justice system, through the security system, and not through plea bargaining, then you can produce a deterrent framework for the country.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We feel the passion and the pain. Thank you. We're all in this together. So we have a number of questions here. One is, what incentives for sound policies? What is the importance of character and commitment of leadership to ensure sustainable development? How do we empower individuals and private sector to influence change, because we're all affected by the policies? And what action do we have in place to drive industry approach to advocacy? And can we adopt a development model to address poverty? And here I would like to ask the keynote speaker to please respond to 2 of the questions. Sir, what incentives can we put in place for sound policy, to drive sound policy? And then the second one I would like you to address is, how do we empower individuals and maybe the organized private sector as one to influence change? Thank you, sir.
Would you like to please come up, or do you want to stand up?
Okay, thank you very much. Alex, I hear you. Alex and I have known each other for quite a while during the Bloomberg media journalism. Okay, now the first question, how do we drive incentive? You see, that is why I didn't want to go into the nitty-gritty of policy, because whatever you say, eventually it boils down to the individual, boils down to the motivation, boils down to the incentive. So the first thing, what I found in the literature, because I'm a researcher, so I have to go by what I find in literature. And then the literature, of course, streamlines experiences of different climes, of different countries. So it's very rich, it's robust, it's incontrovertible. Now, I like the lady that spoke about our disconnectedness from the system. Nobody reads the manifesto. Now, what you observe in every developmental state, whether the old developmental state or the current developmental state, is this large elite consensus. We don't have that. Okay? So because we don't have that generalized elite consensus, which leads to generalized morality, then you cannot kind of instill that incentive. What is incentive? The prospect for reward or punishment. That is incentive in economics. And one of the 10 principles of economics, remember, by what is name? So number 4 is that people respond to incentives. It's simple. So if you want to change behavior, change the incentive system. Now, how do we, change or alter incentive? Behavioral economics has done a lot of work in that respect. But one thing that is significant in order to elicit the right incentive is that you have to commit to a particular paradigm, to a particular philosophy. In our own case, you now see that, especially in the last few years, we do not know whether we have a market economy or whether it's a socialist system or whether it's a populist system. In fact, we don't know what it is. So you now have a confusion of incentives. Now, if you have the market paradigm where the price, determines things, it becomes difficult. And then you have the transparency, as Taiwo mentioned, that transparency that is driven by an evidence-based system. Then you can elicit the right incentive because you know that you will not get away with your actions, because you will be caught, you will be punished. So that's one. Now, how do we build the capacity of individuals and all of it? Again, that is a very big problem. It depends. Everything is driven by the elite consensus. The elite consensus, I can give you examples. I think I mentioned the case of Brazil. Now, going back to Japan, either Japan or South Korea, you know about the Kairesu. The Kairesu is the association, the conglomerate of the big Japanese conglomerates. Okay? That's the biggest thing. And that is about at least 60 to 70% of the economy, right? If you're a member, that means they have that power to drive change in government. And whatever they say, NECA has that. How can you, build such kind of consensus among organized private sector? That is how you can drive the right capacity in government. Again, this is election time. We are not connected. We have not read the manifestos, right? Of course, we have our own individual preferences. But then as an organized private sector, right, we should contribute, even in that manifesto. We should ensure that what we want, this is where the lobby should start. And then when it is the generalized consensus, the larger group of elites, I think that will overcarry. And then eventually, you will now begin to drive the right incentives. That is what is missing in Africa. Okay, and I don't know where it is, because eventually the leaders exploit it, because you see this balkanization and fragmentation everywhere. So, little groups, everybody's seeking out for his own. But there is no such thing as groupthink. That is what the Asians have. Okay, it's about the community. It's about communalism. It's not just about the individual. Just like in Japan, the Japanese will not introduce himself as I am Bongo Adi. No. I will start from the institution that I belong to, the community. So I will start from that. That is the first thing I say, then before my name. And then, but when they ask us Africans, who are you? You now say your name. They don't take us seriously because they feel that something is wrong with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. And thank you very much for all the contributions and questions. Thank you, panelists, for all the input. And yes, this is where the work begins. We're going to put all these ideas together, and we all are aware now of our roles and our actions as citizens and as the organized private sector. Thank you very much for a good panel, and I'd like us to get up for a good picture, and that'll be it. Thank you.
All right. Please stay on the podium, and would like to invite the President and the Director General, along with Professor Adi, to please join, and let's take some pictures. Would like to hand flags to recipients. The first goes to Professor Ogho Adi. to Andersen. Very much. Okay. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. This is usually the outcome of a very engaging, interesting conversation. And a few people have decided to, capture Dr. Bamfo? We would like some decorum in the house, please. Okay, so once again, this event has been hosted by the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association, the umbrella body for the organized private sector. And we appreciate all the industry leaders that have participated virtually and physically. As we bring this event to an end, we would like to once again appreciate Mr. Taiwo Adeniyi, President Neca. We would like to appreciate Mr. Victor Eberajolo. We would like to appreciate Mr. Kunle Oyelano, Dr. Ifeanyi Okoye, OFR MNI, Honorable Treasurer of NECA, NECA Governing Council, our virtual in-laws, the staff, and everybody who has participated. We would like now to please welcome the DG, Mr. Adewale Smart Oyerinde, to give the vote of thanks. Right after that, we will take the anthem. DG, sir. Clap, please.
Thank you very much for attending. I want to thank God for the privilege to gather, even as we wind up the year. Thanks to the President and the members of Council. The Council started 9:30 in the morning, and for Council to still wait till this time, that shows their level of dedication and commitment to this cause. I want to thank all our virtual audience. I want to thank my colleagues in the Secretariat for pulling this through. And one of the objectives of this program is basically to allow us to harvest all those issues that we have cross-sectorally. And you can be rest assured that the paper for this, the policy document that will guide our advocacy moving forward, engaging the current government and also engaging the incoming government, will be put in place for all of us to see and for effective advocacy. So thank you, and we wish you. Pardon me to also thank all the speakers and the keynote speaker. We really appreciate you. So wish you a wonderful afternoon, and please do enjoy the rest of the week. And compliment of the season, probably you are hearing that for the first time from this hall. So thank you once again, and do enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. So we take the national anthem even as we wrap up the event.
All right, all compatriots, Nigerians come again to serve our fatherland with love and strength and faith.